There used to be a sound, not loud, not soft, mechanical, steady. A rhythm of keys hitting paper, a small bell at the end of every line, the flick of a wrist pushing a carriage back to the start. If you had walked into a downtown office in 1965, anywhere in America, that sound would have filled every floor. Hundreds of secretaries in identical rooms, all working in a kind of unconscious rhythm with each other. That sound is gone now. Not gradually, not loudly. It just stopped. And most of us never really noticed when. The machine itself was simple, a heavy steel frame, a round black platen, the cylinder that held the paper, a row of long, thin metal arms called type bars, each one ending in a small raised letter. When you pressed a key, an arm swung up. It struck a ribbon soaked in ink. It left a single character on the page. That was it. No screen, no memory, no undo button. Each letter was a permanent decision. If you made a mistake, you erased it with a small rubber wheel, or you painted over it with a tiny brush dipped in white correction fluid, and you waited for it to dry. If you made too many mistakes, you started the whole page over. The ritual was the entire job. You sat down at the desk, you rolled in a fresh sheet of paper, you set the margins, you typed. You listened for the small bell that warned you the right margin was coming, and then you returned the carriage with a sharp flick of the wrist. At the end of the day, you pulled the paper out of the machine. You held a thing in your hand that hadn't existed 5 minutes earlier. It was strange. It was quiet. It was exactly the right amount of human. For about 100 years, from the 1880s to the 1980s, this was how the modern world wrote. Government documents, legal contracts, doctoral theses, newspaper columns, Hollywood scripts, love letters, ransom notes. If you read it on a page, someone had typed it on one of these. By 1975, a single typewriter, the IBM Selectric, owned about 75% of the American electric typewriter market. By 1986, IBM had sold more than 13 million of them. These weren't tucked away in basements. They were out in the open, on the desks of secretaries on every floor of every office building in every city, in the home studies of writers, in small-town newspapers and rural insurance offices and high school principals' rooms. There were entire job categories built around them. The typist, the secretarial pool, the stenographer, whole floors of buildings, often filled almost entirely with women whose work was the steady rhythm of producing the written record of the modern economy. A whole generation of people went to typewriting school. They practiced on textbooks until they could hit 80 words a minute without looking down. It was a skill. It was a profession. It was a sound on every floor, in every building, in every city in America. The story of how it got there starts with a Wisconsin newspaper editor and a defunct gun company. In 1868, a man named Christopher Latham Sholes filed a patent for what he called the typewriter. Sholes was not an engineer by trade. He was a printer and a journalist who had grown frustrated with how slow it was to write things by hand. He worked on the design with two collaborators, Carlos Glidden and Samuel Soule, and a financier named James Densmore. For 5 years, they tried to commercialize it themselves. They failed. Then in 1873, the patent was bought by a company looking to diversify out of weapons. The American Civil War was over. The Army no longer needed rifles by the millions. The company was called E. Remington and Sons. They had spent the previous decade arming the Union. Now they wanted a peacetime product. In July of 1874, the Sholes and Glidden typewriter went on sale. It was a strange-looking machine, painted with floral decorations, designed by people who had spent a decade making firearms. But it worked. It typed. It changed everything. There's one quiet detail from this period that almost no one remembers. When Remington's engineers arranged the keys, they did something specific. They moved the period and the letter R into the top row, alongside the rest of the letters needed to spell the word Typewriter. The reason was sales. Traveling demonstrators could now type the word typewriter using only the top row of keys in a single fluid motion in front of a customer. It was a parlor trick. And the keyboard layout you are reading these words on, QWERTY, was shaped in part to make a 19th century salesman look impressive. For the next 100 years, almost without exception, This design was the way people wrote: Royal, Underwood, Smith Corona, Olivetti, Olympia. The brand names became part of the language. And then, in the late 1970s, in a quiet office park in Massachusetts, something started to change. A company called Wang Laboratories had been making business calculators. In 1976, they shipped a new product, a single-purpose machine that did one thing the typewriter could not. It let you see what you were writing on a screen. You could type a paragraph, look at it, move a sentence, delete a word, try again, and only when you were satisfied, print it. The implications were enormous. Every revision that used to require retyping a whole page could now be done in seconds. By the early 1980s, Wang word processors were on the desks of corporate America. The typewriter was no longer the only way. And then, in August of 1981, IBM released a small box called the personal computer. The transition wasn't fast. Most secretaries didn't go from a Selectric to a desktop computer overnight. The early personal computers were intimidating, expensive, often slower at simple tasks than the machine they were supposed to replace. For most of the 1980s, the typewriter and the computer sat side by side on the same desks. You drafted on the screen, you printed final copies on the typewriter, or the other way around, but the cracks were widening. In 1983, a program called MacWrite shipped on the Apple Macintosh. In 1984, Microsoft Word launched on the IBM personal computer. That same year, IBM quietly retired the Selectric and replaced it with a smaller, simpler model called the Wheelwriter. Through the late 80s and into the 90s, office by office, the typewriter started to disappear. Not all at once, one desk at a time. The Selectric was wheeled into a storage closet. A monitor took its place. By 1991, IBM did something that, 10 years earlier, would have been unthinkable. They spun off the entire typewriter division into a separate company called Lexmark. The company that had defined the modern office walked away from the product that had built it. For another 20 years, the typewriter quietly held on in the corners of the world. In small law offices that needed to fill in pre-printed forms. In rural government bureaus that hadn't been digitized yet. In writers' studies, on the desks of novelists who liked the noise. But the factories were closing. In 2009, the world's largest remaining manual typewriter manufacturer, a Mumbai-based company called Godrej & Boyce, stopped production. In the 1990s, that factory had been making 50,000 machines a year. By 2009, the orders had collapsed to fewer than 800. In April of 2011, the closure made global news. The headlines were quiet. The world's last typewriter factory had shut its doors. A year and a half later, in November of 2012, a brother factory in Wrexham, Wales rolled the final typewriter ever made in Britain off the line. They donated it to the London Science Museum. That single factory had built nearly 6 million typewriters in 27 years. Then, the line went still. And for most of us, that was the moment the story ended. Except, very quietly, it didn't. In 2013, after a former contractor named Edward Snowden walked out of the National Security Agency with thousands of classified documents, a small purchase order surfaced inside the Russian government. The agency in charge of protecting the Kremlin had ordered a small fleet of new typewriters, German-made, manual, for documents they did not want to risk being seen by anyone outside the room. A typewritten page cannot be hacked. A year later, a member of the German parliament suggested the same thing for confidential government communications. The thing the world had stopped making was being quietly bought again by people who had realized that, in some specific situations, mechanical was safer than digital. It was a small note, a footnote really, but it tells you something about what was lost. Because what was lost was never just a machine. What was lost was a relationship to writing. When you typed on one of those things, every word cost something. Every letter was a small, irreversible decision. There was no autocorrect, no spell check, no undo. You couldn't move sentences around, you couldn't take it back. What this meant was a strange kind of focus. You thought before you typed. You composed the sentence in your head, fully before your fingers moved. You couldn't outsource the thinking to the machine. The machine just recorded what you'd already worked out. It was slower, but in a strange way, it was more honest. You couldn't pretend you knew what you were going to say until you actually said it. And there was something else, the sound. A room full of typewriters had a kind of pulse, the collective rhythm of dozens of people all working at once, all producing something. It told you without anyone saying a word.